Thank you so much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I am just so glad to be here with you today. I very much wish I could be with you in person and I could shake your hand, but as I cannot do that, obviously, I'll give you a virtual namaste and virtual wave. I hope that you'll enjoy the next 60 minutes that we'll spend together. Before I go to my slide, just a little bit about myself. As John spoke so well about my background, I'm originally from Ukraine, but when I was 20 years old, I decided to venture out of my home country and I moved to China. I was really fascinated by Chinese culture and Chinese language, and I wanted to learn the language. So that was 1998, a very long time ago. Some of you were probably in primary school back then. So I spent over 19 years in China, working and living there in Shanghai. And then 3 years ago, my previous company, Korn Ferry, has transferred me to Singapore, and I took on the Asia role. So as I mentioned, living in Asia for more than half of my life showed me and taught me the value of resilience. I believe that Asian people are extremely resilient, but also the value of collective benefit being more important than individual and personal. And these two things really give me confidence that despite the crisis that we are all in right now, and it is tough for a lot of people, I do believe that Asian countries will bounce back faster than many more developed Western countries, just because people very naturally come together to overcome the challenges. So as John mentioned, I'm with Center for Creative Leadership, and Center for Creative Leadership is dedicated to leadership development. Leadership development is our only focus. So the topic today, digital learning success, will be really focused on how to deliver impactful and meaningful leadership development programs and interventions using digital technology. So we'll not be talking about more, technical skills learning. It's really more about how we achieve development and growth of our leaders. And before I begin, I just wanted to share these two pictures with you. I'm sure you've seen that on the internet, right? So the amount of change and disruption that we've all faced in the past 2 months, I think is more than we've experienced in the past 10 years, right? And as digital learning is not a new topic for a lot of us, a lot of the L&D practitioners, a lot of organizations have tried to implement something before. But the situation that we're in certainly creates much more urgency. And there are multiple reasons for that, right? So on one hand, we have the crisis that is unprecedented, and our leaders have to deal with business disruption, worries and stress about their personal well-being and well-being of their families, managing a workforce that is locked at home. Everybody is working from home. How do I, as a leader, keep them engaged, keep them productive? How do I avoid people getting overly stressed or burn out, which is a very, very possible scenario. At the same time, I have to keep an eye on all my competitors, the government regulation, and so on. So we are stuck at home, but we still have responsibility to our organizations and to our leaders to find ways to support them. Beyond the crisis, which I'm sure will end at some point, Asia has been emerging as a global player in the global economy. And Philippines has had a really great success in growing the economy in the past couple of years. What we see in the market that there are many Filipinos companies from Philippines that have aspiration or already have made progress in expanding beyond Philippines or beyond the region, growing into global organizations. So how can we leverage and use this crisis and use it as an opportunity to strengthen our ability to develop our leaders and equip them with the skills that are needed to be truly global leaders? And being a global leader means leading virtual teams anyway, crisis or not. So in Center for Creative Leadership, we are dedicated to supporting you with that. My sharing today, I will not be talking about any of our solutions, just more the best practices and the insights that we've gained by working with a lot of organizations on implementing various digital learning solutions for leadership development. And I think that none of us needs to be convinced that there is a business case for digital learning, right? I personally believe that using technology to develop leaders makes leadership development much more accessible, right? Because traditional face-to-face programs are quite pricey, and most of the organizations would invest maybe on their top leaders or top 10–15% of high potentials, and often underinvest in the rest of the organization that is so critical. So it's not only more cost effective or saves time, it just gives people access to learning and development that they would not normally have if it was a traditional approach. When we think of the millennials and the new generation that is now probably 50% of our workforce, they have a natural preference for just on time, bite-sized learning that is relevant to that, right? So that also serves our goal of engaging that demographics of our workforce. And of course, reducing the environmental impact. For me personally, that is very important if we can minimize the training. So as I mentioned, a lot of organizations started to doing something with regards to leadership development using technology. A lot of companies have implemented learning management systems, and those learning management systems can be integrated with multiple platforms. So technology is there. However, a lot of organizations who have tried to do something with digital learning, how do I put it? Probably were not that successful, right? And as a result, there is a perception among a lot of business leaders or even the learners themselves that digital learning is not as effective as traditional face-to-face. The perception is there. And I don't think we should blame technology for that. We need to really look into root causes of why these initiatives fail, but also what can we do to really make them impactful. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna ask you to open your chat box and help me to brainstorm, answer the question. In your opinion, why is that perception there? Why do organizations or leaders believe that digital learning is not as engaging, is not as impactful as traditional face-to-face? So if you don't mind just spending a couple of seconds opening your chat box and just typing some of your thoughts, I am just gonna open up the chat box and look at some of your answers. Lack of face-to-face interaction. It's impersonal. No good internet connections. Resistance to change. Participants, lack of engagement and attention, right? Lack of employee buy-in. Not everyone is techie. Distraction. No collaboration, less engagement. Fantastic. So I think common, thank you so much. Thank you. So many answers. Really, really interesting to hear your inputs. So I guess if I summarize, the common themes are you need to have a technology that supports you. So the bandwidth, internet connection, people being educated on how to use that technology. That is a given. This is like a hygiene factor, right? But what a lot of you mentioned is that it's an engagement. It's lack of personal interaction. People get distracted very easily and so on. Those are very, very valid points. And the objective of today's sharing is to help you think of different ways that that can be mitigated. My personal opinion that digital learning can be impactful, right? We just need to try harder. And I always joke, you know, when I'm asked to provide an analogy of, you know, how digital learning compares to traditional face-to-face, I always talk about how people used to meet each other, right? So we used to have matchmakers. So an old auntie will come and talk to you and then introduce you to a boy. And now what do we have? We have Tinder. Is it the same? Is it the same experience? No, it's a completely different experience, but Tinder does the job for a lot of people. It serves its purpose. It works, right? It's not the same, but we can make it work if we have very clear objectives and clear expectations. So I just realized my husband is also working from home, so I need to be careful talking about Tinder. He's probably going to wonder why I'm mentioning it. So, but I just wanted to illustrate that digital learning will never provide exactly the same experience as face-to-face. Nothing can replace face-to-face interaction. But that does not mean that we cannot make it impactful and cannot make it work. So now let's dive into some of the best practices and strategies that will ensure successful implementation of the digital learning. And what I'm gonna do, I am just gonna, after every slide, I'm gonna pause and look at, are there any interesting questions that coming through? And if yes, I'll just gonna read them aloud. So when we talk about the reasons why digital learning is not as impactful, we talked about engagement. We talked about it being relevant, ability to keep people focused. But for any L&D professional, we know that there is no guarantee that face-to-face program can achieve all of that. I've been through enough face-to-face development programs where I was not engaged, I lost my focus, and I did not really feel that I was developing myself. So I'd like to remind everyone that digital learning is still learning. It's still developing people. So the same core principles of effective leadership development or behavioral change apply to digital learning as well. It's just without being in front of each other, we need to work much harder to achieve that interaction and engagement. So let's look at some of the strategies and best practices that we could consider. And before I do that, I'd like to just clarify, because there's so many different terminologies, right? So the terminology that I will be using today, you can see in the slide in front of you. So there are live online programs. What does that mean? Live online is facilitated by a trainer or a business leader inside of your organization using either Zoom or WebEx. So it is a live program where people do see each other and interact. They're just not in the same room. I would say that this is the most engaging approach, and I will strongly recommend everybody consider that. And I've dedicated a portion of my presentation to talk about how to make that impactful. Then we have moderated online programs. So those programs that are done in a cohort, so a group of people goes through the same structured program online. So there's no live interaction, but there is a interaction online. Usually these programs will have, you know, a cohort of participants can be 25, 30, 40 people. They should all be more or less the same level with the same learning objectives. And it can be moderated by a facilitator or HR or a business leader. So it's a combination of watching videos, maybe reading a little bit, doing some self-assessments, getting assignments, and then discussing all of that within the group offline. So it's not live, but let's say within 24 hours, all of us will be able to exchange our opinions. I would say this is the most effective way of pure digital learning, and if moderated well, can really support the learning journey that participants are going through. This third type is self-directed learning, and most of the platforms that you know, like Coursera or LinkedIn Learning, and there's so many and new ones are coming up every day. They are self-directed learning. So it's me and my laptop, and I'm either using videos or playing games or doing some reading or quizzes. I believe, in my professional opinion, that this type of digital learning is helpful to reinforce what people already learn, right? And let me talk a little bit about that later. So if you already took them through either face-to-face or a live online virtually facilitated program, and they were able to practice the new skill or really understand deeper of why I'm behaving this way, what do I need to do to change, then frequent bite-sized self-directed learning pieces are really helpful to keep reinforcing it, to keep sharing best practices, frequently asked questions, and so on. So as a standalone self-directed learning, probably impactful if it's a technical skill. So if I want to learn some coding language, maybe. But if it's a leadership development initiative where we're expecting people to develop their leadership capabilities, change their behaviors, or change their mindsets, as a standalone probably will be the least effective. The fourth approach is a webinar. So what I am doing now with you. Webinars are the least engaging. However, they're very useful when we need to inform or educate a large group of people on a single topic. So for example, if you have a digital learning journey built for your participant, using whatever platform or technology you use, doing a kickoff webinar where you'll explain to them the process, what the experience is going to be, what the outcomes that are expected, that is a very effective way of a webinar. However, webinar in itself is the least effective way of generating behavioral change or mindset shift, because learning does not happen by listening to someone. Learning happens by doing three things: increasing self-awareness, so receiving feedback and reflection. How does that impact my role? How does it impact people around me? What do I need to change? The next step that creates learning is being stretched, being pushed in a very gentle way to behave differently and actually use different skills or use different mindset. And then the third one is making sure that that's sustainable, making sure that it sticks. And that happens through continuous feedback and creating accountability where other people will help me to keep myself accountable. So webinar cannot deliver that. That probably will need to be done through a combination of multiple approaches, and I will talk about those later. So let me pause for a second. I'm going to check the Q&A box to see if there are any questions that are worth asking. John, for some reason, I cannot see the Q&A box. Do you want to read any questions?
Sure. Let me read some for you. So, like, one question by Apenuela is, are there any free learning management systems that you think would be nice for us to start with?
Free learning management systems, no, not a good one that I know of. Let me put it this way. But I think that the really good ones, of course, are not cheap. I would say that a good learning management system does not need to be very complex. Actually, I would say the simpler, the better. But the really good ones, both from technology side and the design side, I'm not aware of anything that is for free. Sorry.
Okay. The other question from Sayek is, what would you recommend are the skill sets that individuals and organizations should have for them to be able to transition to digital learning?
That is a very good question. And if you don't mind, I'd like to hold on to that question
Sure.
because some of my further sharing will talk about that, but I'll come back to it to summarize.
All
I
right.
don't think that it's only skill sets on the part of the learner. We need to
All
create
right.
an ecosystem for them to thrive using digital learning. So it's not just their skill sets.
All right. There's also another question from Luz Mercurio. She's asking, how long would an ideal webinar session be for it to be effective?
A webinar should not be more than 1 hour. So I always, when people ask me how to design this, whatever of these formats you want to use, right? Think of it, you're designing for children. So when people are engaged virtually, even if it's a live virtual session, it's very easy for them to get distracted, right? It's not the same as sitting in the same room, right? So think of you're designing for someone who has attention span of a child, right? So sitting and just listening to someone, even if you can ask one question, right? For more than an hour, it's very hard. So for webinar, I would say no more than an hour.
All right. Amazing. So I guess after this, you can proceed, Diana. We can
Yeah.
accommodate some of the other questions later. Thank you so much for answering them.
Sure, of course. So let's go on. So let's look at some of the strategies. We in CCL, through our research, we came up with 6 key strategies of ensuring success of whatever digital learning you are implementing, right? So I will be platform agnostic right now. So from this strategy point of view, 6 things need to happen. And as you will see, they are no much different from the strategies you implement while you are putting together any learning or development intervention, be it face-to-face or digital. It's really the same. As I said, we just need to work harder when we are only confined to technology. So the first one is support from the top, right? So when you're asking me about the skills that the participants need to have, I would say, what skills do our leaders need to have? If our top leaders, if my manager does not demonstrate commitment to my learning using that digital technology, if the senior leaders do not know what their people are learning, if the senior leaders are not bringing it up all the time, then there is not enough sponsorships and people will feel, well, that's not really important. So be it traditional face-to-face or digital learning, in order to dedicate time and mind share, I really need to link it to my personal development. And if my leader or senior leaders are not engaged in promoting that, I probably will not really spend a lot of time with that. So getting support from the top. What has been really powerful is creating some video content where your company leaders will do short videos on different topics. It can be a Q&A or it can be just a 5-minute video on a topic. That has been really powerful and you can easily integrate it into your learning management system. Using whatever social media platform you use as in your organization, like Yammer or any others, to share that content. But most importantly, that leaders need to be talking about it. They need to be highlighting why it's important and how it's linked to the business objective. So I put it as number 1, as the most critical. Number 2, and this is very, very true when we are using technology-enabled learning, digital learning. Less is better. So as a leadership development professional that works with many, many clients, we often face a situation where a client will tell us, we only have 2 or 3 days that leaders can spend on your program, but we want these 15 topics to be covered, right? And we always push back. Even in traditional face-to-face environment, we tell them this is too much. We are not a university. We're not lecturing. Right? We are following 70-20-10 design principle that only 10% of learning actually happens through formal instruction. Everything else is peer feedback, coaching, and practicing, right? So if you only have 1 day or half a day for whatever digital learning intervention, then select just one topic, right? And be very careful with the topics that you select. A lot of clients of mine that implement self-directed learning platforms, they like platforms that have a lot of content, like a very vast library of different topics, because then they feel they're getting value for money. But actually the levels of engagement with programs like that are quite low because people get lost, right? It is much better, and it has been proven effective based on your business strategy. Select maybe 3 or 4 topics for a year, 3 or 4 competencies, behaviors, or mindset shifts that you'd like to achieve. And then dedicate maybe 3 to 5 months to each, so they can roll over one after another. Select one module, one topic, and then use different methods to integrate in their day-to-day work. So it can be a webinar by a leader, followed by maybe 4-hour live online session facilitated by a professional trainer where they can practice. Then maybe a few digital learning interventions that reinforces that, and then can be combined with a coaching. And then you do it for 3, 4, 5 months, you measure the impact, then you move on to another topic. So trying to do too much, if you are not face-to-face, if you're just using digital technology, is overwhelming. People will get lost, and then the engagement will be quite low. So if I had to highlight one learning from working with many clients, really less is more, less is better. The next strategy is as applicable for traditional learning as it is for digital learning. The design needs to be centered around the learner, their level, their development objectives, their situation. As you all said, if they do not have a good access to internet, then whatever the best platform you will implement will not work for them, right? As an example, here in Singapore, we all know Grab, right? So Grab has hundreds and hundreds of thousands drivers who they are associates, so to speak. They're not full-time employees, but in order to engage them and develop them, Grab wanted to do something. And they understand the drivers in the car the whole day, they might not have a 4G or 5G, whatever, access to internet or Wi-Fi. So how can they access that learning? So Grab created a series of 2-minute videos that are being sent to them by WhatsApp, right? And each video is maybe on resilience, on healthcare, well-being, and so on. So it's not a very big investment. They created those videos themselves, but it's delivered in a way that is really centered around that learner, the needs of that learner, and the technology that the learner actually has access to, right? So when you're selecting the platform, when you're selecting the design of content on that platform, it's really understanding the learner intention and their own objective. Is it somebody who is about to transition from individual contributor to a manager level? Is it somebody that is struggling with a particular issue, right? So a shorter but more targeted learning interventions are much more impactful if it's a digital learning scenario. The next strategy is fantastic. Leader teachers. We need to make sure that the managers of our learners are engaged and involved in reinforcing the concept. I can go into the best digital platform and get access to the best digital content on a skill of coaching, for example, coaching skills. But if my manager is not coaching me and is not talking to me about his expectation that I'm going to do the same for my teams, then I will not apply my learning, right? So that element of reinforcing the learning, you cannot expect technology to do that, right? It's the leader job. So getting leaders involved as much as possible in that post-learning phase, which we in CCL we call apply phase, is very, very critical. And the next one is also very critical, partners. You can call them learning partners or accountability partners. So what happens after I finish my learning? I watched a few videos, I did some reflection, I decided on my development goals. I watched another few videos, or maybe I had a live online session with a facilitator where I actually got to practice some of those skills. What happens after I leave that digital classroom? Am I going to apply it or not? And it largely depends on how committed I am, but also what support system around me. So what we always recommend in any type of learning intervention is at the end of the program, the participants select a accountability partner, one or two. And these people make commitment to each other to keep each other accountable. So for example, if my goal is as being more assertive and saying no to people, saying I cannot do this or I disagree, my accountability partner will come to me once a week, once every 2 weeks, and ask me, so did you do it? How did it work? What did you learn? What was difficult? So when I know that somebody out there will keep me accountable, it is proven that I will much likely to stick to my development goals and keep applying the knowledge that I learned. And the last one, of course, we would not be learning and development professionals if we did not talk about measuring success. How do I measure impact of any digital learning intervention? Two parts here. One is the same way you measure impact of any learning intervention. If it's leadership development, you measure the behavioral change, you measure the business impact. So there's no difference here between digital learning or face-to-face learning. Behavioral change can be measured through interviewing the line manager, doing a 360 assessment and self-reflection of the learner as well. However, in the digital learning experience scenario, there is an added layer of what we can measure, because technology gives us a fantastic analytics capability that allows us to measure the level of engagement. What articles and videos did they click? How did they interact with their cohort if it's a moderated online learning, and so on. So I would encourage you that if you're in a situation that you are selecting the service provider and the learning platform, really look at the analytics that they provide. Be careful with measuring time spent though. Just because somebody spent a lot of time on the platform does not mean that they really engage with it. So it's more their activity on the platform that matters. So as you can see, and I kept telling you throughout the session that digital learning and development is still learning. So the same principles apply. It's just technology presents us with additional challenges. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about those challenges and how we can make these digital learning experiences more impactful and engaging for the participants. And I specifically would like to talk about virtually facilitated or live online programs here, because those I think are the most impactful, and they allow for peer discussion and practice and feedback. Right, and I have one more slide on that I'll talk after this one. So there are 4 key principles of making sure that the learning actually happens, especially in a digital format. Learning needs to be personalized. So the participant needs to be able to receive feedback that relates just to them. And live online scenario where it's a 3 to 4 hours session facilitated over Zoom by a trainer allows us to have breakout rooms, right? Where people are divided to 3 or 4 people groups, and they are giving an exercise, experiential activity or a topic to discuss. And then they can receive feedback both from the trainer, facilitator, but also from their peers. So that creates this personalized feel that I'm actually getting input about my behaviors, my thinking, and I'm learning from others as well. So that is very, very critical. The design of the program needs to be intuitive. It really has to make sense for people why I'm doing this first and this later. So for example, if you are building a digital program for a mid-level managers, right? We need to keep in mind what competencies or what behaviors, what capabilities that level of managers usually struggles with, right? And it has to be really linked to the individual development plans. So they understand that, oh, first I need to understand how do I manage myself? What type of leader am I? How do I engage people? Then I need to learn how I coach and develop my teams. Then I need to learn how to actually manage the business and think more strategically. So whatever you design and communicate, it has to be very easy to understand the flow and make sense for the participants. The third point, that learning has to be relevant, especially, and that's not a secret, I'm sure all of us know that, especially in times like this when there's so much uncertainty. Very often the long-term big strategy is kind of put on hold, and it's basically just surviving day by day, right? But that's not the best way to develop leaders. So whatever organization response is to this disruption, it has to be translated to the mindset and behaviors of the leaders. And that's the job of us, the HR professionals and the line managers. And whatever interventions we put in place have to be very relevant. So if I was designing any learning journey now, digital or not, and I was not talking about resilience, leading with agility in times of crisis, I would not be serving those leaders, right? So whatever organization is going through has to be immediately reflected in the learning content that you're providing. So a lot of our clients, since the situation started with COVID-19, were asking about leading virtual teams, right? Because it's so relevant and people actually asking and telling their HRs, please support me, I don't know how to do it better. And the last one, caring. Caring here refers to psychological safety. There is a lot of research that proves that the true learning and behavioral change only happens when people feel safe. Safe to listen to feedback, safe to reflect, safe to express themselves. So whether you are using live online or pure digital online learning, we need to make sure that we make people feel that it's okay to make mistakes. It's part of the learning. We support you. So creating this very supportive learning environment. And again, technology cannot do that. It is done by a combination of the line manager, senior leaders, and the HR. So let me pause here again. Let's look at the questions. John, would you like to read some for me?
Sure. So what I did so far while you were discussing, Diana, was I was trying to process some of the questions into themes and categories, since there's really a lot. So if you look at the number of participants that we have around almost 490, like close to 500. And there are some other people who are in Facebook right now watching us around, like the last time I checked was around 80 people. So I think that's a very good turnout. And congratulations on on doing such a great job on explaining a lot of these things to us. Um, just one thing that came out that's related to yesterday's discussion and yours was, while Vanessa from yesterday's webinar was talking, when we were asking her what can we do to what can we do so that digital learning can actually take place in our organizations. And she said one thing that's very important. And she said that one of the most essential things that has to be there is a strategy. There has to be a digital learning strategy, because otherwise it will not move. It will not be able to convince people. And I like the fact that when you started presenting all of those 6 things, the digital learning strategies, they're very tangible and they're very intuitive, like easy to understand and implement on the most basic sense. My question is, strategies are easy to make, but what sometimes becomes very hard is buy-in from top management. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of our audience right now are also having the same challenges, trying to convince their managers to provide investment on the strategies that are proposing. So when you talked about measurability earlier, what do you think can you suggest as a good buy-in for strategy so that people can use it as a main objective in their digital learning strategy?
Sure, I think that's a wonderful question. And I have to say that no matter what we as HR professionals trying to do, digital learning or any other topic, the biggest hurdle is always the lack of buy-in from the senior management. So I don't
Right.
think we accept any change, anything that we are trying to implement. So I would say that understandably, those who are in the most senior level roles are the people who are probably, how do I call it, chronologically challenged. They're older, right? And might have biases against technology themselves. Maybe they are not comfortable or they're just so used to face-to-face. So I would say the crisis right now, don't let it go to waste, right? So I would say now leaders just cannot say, oh, I don't think it works, because nothing else will work, right? So I would just encourage you to convince them to try, to experiment. So this is a time to just try and try with them, right? And my recommendation is start with a live online session. Bring an experienced trainer or facilitator. Select a topic like crisis leadership, for example, that is very relevant for them right now. And let them experience how, they all can be sitting in their living rooms and come together as a leadership team online via Zoom and have an impactful discussion and reflection, right? So very often at that level, it's very hard to convince people who think they know it all, right? So you let them experience it, that it actually works. This is one. Second, get them involved. Find one person who believes in it and use this person to actually create content. And this person will get a more prominent exposure across the organization, will demonstrate his or her leadership, and then you can measure impact of engagement among the organization, right? So I'm telling all of my clients, never let a good crisis go to waste. Right. All leaders now are struggling with engaging their teams. So if there is one who is willing to do something, be interviewed, make a video, answer some questions, share his personal experiences, and if we can see that everybody in the organization engaging with that and responding to that, that's your proof that that's working.
Right. I love how you answered it very simply on 2 points. So the first one being that let's make the crisis as an opportunity. So I think that's a very positive way to look at it, simply because the crisis has really moved everyone. We don't have any more choice but to engage the digital platforms. Otherwise, we will not move. So
exactly.
That's a very, very good and strong point to utilize, that window might be over in a few months and we might not have it, so might as well make good use of it. So that's one. The other thing is, I really liked how you pinpointed the idea of champions when you said that we need to select and identify people who's part of that management group and be our champions, so that they can be people who can rally for us, because that involvement is very necessary for culture to change.
Absolutely.
The follow-up question to that, and I'm pretty sure you have this because I go to your website a lot, is can you discuss to us a success case of digital, some people some organizations or individuals or teams who use digital learning as a strategy, and what did it do for them, so that our audience will also be able to use these cases to justify some of the things that they have to for their managements to have buy-in.
Sure, I can share two case studies that from the clients that I worked with without naming them.
Sure.
Now, organization number one is a global manufacturing organization that has 95% of the employees are engineers, and they always struggle with people who are going from individual contributor into first-time manager role, because they're all very strong technical people, very strong individual contributors, and very often they get promoted because they are strong in what they do, but they're completely unprepared to lead, to manage people. On the other side, because there's so many of them globally, traditional face-to-face, bringing everybody together in one room was just not possible before the crisis, so there was no budget and no way these people can travel. So the client was looking for a digital solution, and they went with a moderated online program. So they've grouped people into cohorts of 30, 35 people, and they're all in the same boat. They're all about to be promoted, and they know that they're going to be promoted. So there is a sense of urgency. I need to prepare myself to lead people. So they had a kickoff session that was delivered by multiple BU heads. So depending on the cohort, they talked about the expectations of the first-time managers, the problems that usually people face. So kind of put the context together.
Right.
They went through a 6-week moderated online program. So they were very structured, 6 topics, 1 topic per week, and then a lot of discussion moderated by a CCL facilitator, right?
Right.
After that, they received, they arranged a 3-way conversation for everyone between the HR, the manager, and the learner. And then 3 months later, there was like a virtual session that was not content driven, but more kind of reflection. What worked, didn't work, what did you struggle with? So client implemented this 2 years ago. They've already had 8 or 9 cohorts that go that, and the measurable impact is the performance evaluation of people who are newly promoted in people management roles is so much higher than before they launched this program. So obviously people are much more better prepared to manage their teams. So this is one example. The second example, the client that I'm working with right now, I spoke to the client maybe 5 months ago, and they had 25 women leaders across the region. It's a French bank. Multiple countries in APAC, and they wanted to put a really intensive program, like a women in leadership program, and we're working on that. And then of course the crisis happened, and the client was telling me, you know, I feel so bad because these female leaders are really struggling, but I only have like 20% of my original budget. So what we did for them, we said, let's do something light, but now. Simple, but right now, because they need support now. So what we did, we combined 2 live online sessions. So 2 4-hour sessions, one on resilience and another on leading through crisis with agility. And we combined it with 3 hours of coaching. So first coaching before first module, then after first module, and then after second module. So very simple. It was very cost effective, but leaders got some oxygen right away, you know. So it was something, as I said, less is more in this case, but fast. So this is an example of two case studies.
I love it. Like they're very reasonable, and they're very simple. They're very basic. In fact, I like your second example a lot, because the agility required to address a certain problem because the crisis arose was there. You know, as soon as they needed, because the crisis happened, you were able to adjust and configure programs that are related and specific only to their budget, and also to the topics that will be necessary right now. See, I think that type of, you know, flexibility in digital learning is very, I think it's very now, you know, and it's forcing people now to reflect why those opportunities are actually there in the first place. So for everyone who's putting their questions, just put them in, because we're this is the Q&A portion already. What I'm doing right now is I'm trying to synthesize and combine some of the relevant questions, because I know we will not be able to cover each and every one of them. For those that will not be able to cover, we will put them together and download them, and we will try to write an article based on those questions, so that you will still receive the answers from various sources and some of the research that we will do, but at the same time be able to learn from this session based on the time that we have. The other question that I saw, Diana, and this is very interesting for me. There are a lot of leadership questions in the chat box. So like the leader should be compassionate, the leader should be strategic, what type of buy-in can the leaders do, etc. But I think we can synthesize that question into one of your strategies a while ago about teacher leaders, right? So in the strategy, there's a tab there on teacher leaders. So can you please elaborate on what type of qualities we as learning development practitioners should have as teacher leaders, so that we can contribute to that culture change towards digital learning?
That's a very difficult question if you ask me to just identify one. Can I just say one mindset and one skill?
Sure. I think that will be very helpful already.
So mindset, I believe, is empowering. As learning development professionals, there's very little we can do on our own. Right? What we can do really effectively is that we need to make our leaders accountable for developing their people. And then we need to provide them with tools and resources and best practices. So the mindset that I will use is empower. I am here to empower you, business leader, to be a better leader to your people. This is a mindset. Skills, I would say influencing. Influencing strategically. So very often when business leaders talk to HR, they complain that we just use this HR language, you know, it's not linked to the business. So telling the leader, we are going through crisis. How many of your direct reports can anticipate the future in 6 months? Is there a gap in their capability? Because I think what we are going through right now, we all need to find a way to survive short term, but emerge as a stronger business long term, right? So there's a gap. Very few leaders, even really seasoned leaders, are able to do that. So if I have the capability of influence strategically my business leaders and show them what needs to be done and what their role is, I think that that's the most important skill, because all the other skills I have as an L&D professional, if I cannot convince my business stakeholders, I cannot do anything. So if I had to just choose those two, that's my choice.
Right. I think those are amazing choices, Diana. And I like the fact that you highlighted strategic thinking and awareness, because one of the things that a lot of leaders are lacking right now would be simply that. Like, if you know, like recently, like even in the studies that I read from CCL, a lot of leaders are preoccupied right now with firefighting. You know, they're always busy day on day trying to achieve tasks. But when you said something about let's look forward 6 months ahead, or let's look forward 1 year ahead, people, especially learning and development practitioners or HR practitioners, sometimes even I am guilty in saying that, well, that's not my problem. That's the problem probably of the strategic management or the strategic planning group, because they're supposed to predict the future for us, line up the strategy, and then we will just follow. But I think the mindset that you're talking about right now is very different, because you're talking about that, no, it's not just the strategic management and planning people that should have those competencies. Those competencies should also be present in learning and development professionals, because they are the ones who are in charge of capacity building for the organization. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think you put it very well.
Right. Amazing. Okay. So if you don't mind, Diana, maybe just last two questions since we're already
Sure.
at 3. Is that fine?
No problem.
So there's a very interesting question here from Shaira, asking, well, I'm just gonna rephrase this, okay, because it's a bit tricky. So do you think digital learning only applies to millennials? And if it does not, how can we then encourage the other generations like baby boomers and Gen Xs to also transition to digital learning?
I think it's a very good question. So first, I don't think it only applies to millennials. It just millennials are very comfortable with it, right? So you don't need to teach them or explain a lot. That's their habitat, right? They live on it. So with other people, it just takes more work. So I just remembered how I was teaching my mother to use a smartphone. So it took and my mother is not that old, you know, but still. So it took a few days of frustration, but once she got it, she's using it, right? So we just need to start with something really simple and then build their comfort over time. But just because they're not comfortable with it now does not mean it doesn't apply to them. It just, we need to work harder to make them comfortable with it.
All right. That's very nice. This very last question will suit very well to where you are. There's some people who are asking if there are other materials that they can access and use so that it will help them not just on digital learning, but also on leadership. Can you please answer this question for them?
Sure. The best source is ccl.org website.
Yes.
There are so many articles and white papers and research. We have some amazing research and it's all for free. So we have a page dedicated to COVID-19 crisis leadership. So there are crisis leadership specific articles and information. So I would certainly encourage you to do that.
Thank you. And I can attest to that, like I love downloading CCL materials, like start of 2017 when I found out who CCL is. And ever since I started my master's in Melbourne, CCL was one of my good sources of best practices, cases, and researches. So I think a lot of people will also find it very helpful because the white papers that you guys have are very easy to understand. It's
Yeah.
less noisy compared to others, plus the fact that it's also very current. So that for me is very important because it's not just like a 2-year-old article. So yes, thank you very much for producing all of those good things for us and for
Wow.
accommodating us today, Diana. Calling all the way from Singapore and taking out time from your busy hours to accommodate this type of learning for a cause.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so pleased to see there's a lot of interest in the topic of digital learning, but also topic of leadership. And I certainly believe that once we overcome the current crisis, Philippines as a country and as a market has a very bright future. And through the work that we do with some of our clients in the Philippines, I can see so many high potential leaders,
Right.
so many bright talents. They just need exposure and opportunity to prove themselves. So I think you have a lot of work to do, but they're also really really well a very receptive audience for
Right.
you. So wishing everybody stay safe and healthy, and we'll get through this tough time, and we will emerge as stronger and more resilient leaders.
Yes, thank you. And we look forward to more collaboration with CCL. I know next week we have Sunil, which is
Yes.
CCL Senior Research Director. She's going to talk about future fluent leaders, which is very relevant to what we just talked about a while ago, about how people should have strategic awareness and strategic thinking. So thank you so much, Diana, for gracing us and also for making the learning very rich. I'll send you a lot of the comments and also some of the questions that the people have sent. I think you will find them very helpful, if not for possible qualitative research, because we're looking at around 480 a while ago participants, and a lot of them have already put their thoughts in the chat button. That in
Mhm.
itself is just like free feedback from people.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to reading that. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
And
Thank
have
you,
a wonderful
Diana.
afternoon.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.